Good afternoon. We extend to you a warm welcome from Provo, Utah. I'm Sister Esplin and will be the host for today's class. Today's class is offered to the general public by the BYU Family History Library. Our presenter is Liz Hutchison, who has been a missionary at the BYU Family History Library and completed coursework at BYU. She has a love of learning and an extensive background in family history and genealogical research. We hope you will find your time with us productive and enjoyable. I'll now turn the time over to Liz.
All right, so today we are going to be going over French family history, and this can be kind of complicated, as you can see, but right here I've made another French guide, and this will be posted on the website, and I will show you at the end how you can access that. But first off, we have some key words that I think are the most important. An act is pretty easy. In French, it's act with a little E on the end. You have appeared. This is one of the main words that you're going to come across the most. And that word kind of signifies the beginning of where the act begins. Bans are publication or ban. Baptism, baptême, and baptisé. So if you've seen the Latin one, there's a lot of similarities. French is a Latin-based language, as is Spanish and Italian. So any knowledge of those kind of language root words will really help you be able to look at a record and determine what's being written about. So we have birth, naissance, and né. You can kind of think of like Noel, or when a female has her maiden name given, they have N-E-E. So that's what she was born with. Next, we have burial. There's a lot of different words for it. There's sépulture, kind of like a sepulcher. There's enterrement, which literally means interment, so being under the earth, and enterré. Church and parish records. Parish is paroisse. You have acte paroissiaux, and you have église, which is church. So that's kind of similar to ecclesiastical. Civil registries are known as Registre de l'État civil, le mairie, or la maison communale. There's lots of different words. The only time you're going to really be coming across these words is at the beginning of a record, when they sit there and tell you, okay, this is going to be a record from the civil registry of the commune of Hainaut, kind of a deal, or Ransard. Next, we have death. This has a lot of different French words. You have décès, which is like a decedent, décédé. There's mort, which is death, like a mortuary. So you can kind of recognize those base words just in English. Expiré, expired. Défunt is deceased. Declarant, that's another important word, because the declarants are the people that are actually declaring the record. So when you see that, a lot of times the declarants are related to the key person on the record. And that's a word that, you know, you're going to want to come across and note where that's at, especially if the person's related. Next, we have index, which can be known as index or table. These are usually at the end of, you know, it depends on the microfilm that you're looking at, but they're typically at the end of a year, there will be a little index, or they have 10-year tables in the Family Search catalog that kind of have all the names written out for specific things. That's really helpful, especially when you don't want to, you know, you don't want to go through all of these pages. It's really helpful to say, okay, the last name I'm looking for is Villain. I'm going to look in the V and I'm going to mark down all of these ones. Jeudi is a very important word because it means that the person that was making the record made a mistake when they were writing. And a lot of times they didn't want to actually, you know, use their ink and cross out a word. So when they made a mistake, they would use the word je dis. And it kind of means, or rather, the literal translation is I say, or I'm saying. So how this will present is you'll see something like Jean-Joseph Castin was born on the 5th of March, or rather, jeudi, on the 8th of April. So you got to pay attention to that word because it means that whatever they wrote right before was an error. You have last name and surname, which is family name, nom de famille. Mariage has lots of different words that are very similar to Latin words. Unir, joigner, épouser, and they look pretty much like they do in English. You can say, oh, alliance, okay. Unir, that's like unify, join. Épouser is like spouse. So it's kind of simple. When you look at a word, you can kind of almost tell what a word is just based on how it looks, and that can help you know how to read these French records. Relationships are an important thing. Frère, kind of like a fraternity, is a brother, and sister is sœur, which is like a sorority. So you can kind of look at those words. We have child, enfant, just like in the Latin records. This doesn't mean infant. It just means a child under whatever that age is that's considered an adult. So when you see an enfant of this person, it doesn't necessarily mean it's a little baby or a toddler. It can be someone as old as, say, 18. Godfather and godmother are very similar to the Latin. There's parent and marraine. So you can kind of see the P and then the M. That tells you exactly what gender you're looking for. Him and her is Louis. And the reason why I pointed this out is a lot of times they will say, for example, in a birth record, this person is the child of the declarant. So what they will say is the child, l'enfant de Louis, of him, and then le déclarant, which is up here. So that's how you can kind of determine, oh, that's going to be the father then. Moving on, we have husband, lots of different words. There's mari, époux, conjoint. The X in the cursive language, I find it looks very similar to SE, which is unfortunate because that's the word for wife. You will come across this in marriage records where it's saying, and this person signed the record and they happen to be the maternal uncle of the, and then it will have this word époux, and you can't really tell if that's an X or an SE. And that's very important to be able to know this person is related to which side, the mother or the wife or the husband side. So you kind of have to really zoom in and look at that in order to get it right. Next, we have le jeune and l'aîné. This means junior and senior. I don't come across it too much in the Belgium records. For the most part, everyone's just Jean-Joseph and Marie-Joseph and Jean-Jacques. And they don't really care that everyone has those same exact names. So you won't come across it too much. But if you do, know that that means junior and then senior. Single and unmarried is célibataire, kind of like a celibate. Son and daughter, fils, with an S on the end is son, and then fille, with an E on the end, is daughter. Widower and widow is veuf or veuve. This really comes in handy with death records because it kind of tells you, oh, if this person that died is the widower of this person, that means the wife died before him. So you can kind of use that to say, okay, these dates are going to be before this time period. We have witness, témoin, which is kind of like testimony. Witnesses aren't always related, and sometimes they are, but they always appear at the end of an act. We'll go over that in particular. Then you have the word beau or belle, which literally means beautiful, handsome. And when you add that in front of a word, it turns it into in-law. So the way that you say brother-in-law is beau-frère, which is kind of like a handsome brother, but it's actually just the word that they use. That continues with belle-mère, demi-père, demi-sœur. This is demi, which is half, so that's step. And that's pretty easy. Now, the date and time calculations are very important in French and Belgian records. You'll see this word a lot, heure. It doesn't really matter what the exact hour is that someone came and presented a child for a baptism or for a birth record. So you need to know that that's what the word is so that you don't get too confused about, oh, is this something I need to know and I need to write down? They'll just have, hey, this child was born on this day at this exact hour. So as long as you know that that's hour, you can kind of skip that information. Day is jour, kind of like a journal, which is daily update. Month, mois. Year is l'an or l'année, so annual. Yesterday has a lot of different words. There's hier, there's la veille, which is kind of an interesting word that's more like the eve. And le jour d'hier, which is literally the day of before or of yesterday. Today, I've also found a lot of words in the French documents. You got aujourd'hui, so at this day here, kind of is a literal translation. C'aujourd'hui means the same thing. Sometimes you'll see le même jour. Même means the same. And then le courant. That one comes across a lot when they'll say they were born on the 6th day of the current month. Okay, well, that's whatever this record is indicating. From there, we have morning, noon, and afternoon. They will say what time someone appeared or what time they were born. So, matinee, that can help you remember that. Midi is in the middle. Afternoon, l'après-midi, which is after midi. And then la soirée is kind of evening. The months in French are really easy to know. They look pretty close. There's janvier, février, mars, avril, mai, juin, juillet, auguste, septembre, octobre, novembre, décembre. Just like with Latin records, when you see 7 and then there's a BRE, that means September. Doesn't mean the 7th month, which would be July. It means sept as in like a heptagon. So that's going to be September. So you got to be aware that from September going on, you might come across these numbers instead. Now, occupations are kind of the flavor of a record. There's lots of words for farmer, agriculture, cultivateur, fermier, I've seen before. A day laborer. When I was first going through these records, I was like, do they do something with the newspaper? I mean, what is this word indicating? But it's actually just they do things. They are hired by the day. Glassblower is verrier. Belgium was known and is known for its glass blowing. So a lot of people are going to have that as their occupation. Marchal ferrant is kind of like a blacksmith. Fer, well, iron is fer in French. So it kind of means like someone that's over iron. Garde champêtre. This one you're going to come across a lot of times is the witnesses to an act. A garde champêtre is kind of like a field guard. It was their version of kind of a police officer, but he wasn't quite a police officer. He had more roles than that. Ménagère and ménager, housekeeper. They manage things. You got sage-femme, which literally means wise woman. And obstétricienne is another term. You'll come across these in birth records, especially. Médecin is doctor. I don't come across these as many except for cloutier, which means nailsmith or someone that nails. And then briquetier, there's brick right there, so that's pretty obvious what that word is. These occupations are going to come in handy when you come across Belgium records that have people with the same name. And there's actually this one case that I came across where there were 2 families and they happened to be twins, this Jean-Joseph Belain and then Jean-Jacques Belain. And they happened to both marry 2 women named Marie-Joseph at the same time within like 2 years of each other. And then to make that worse, since these were twins, they had fun when they named their kids. So the first kids that they had, they named Marie Joseph. And throughout the years, they're actually naming their kids similar names, like they're trying to keep this cute little twin thing together. And so the only thing that I could really use to help set these people apart was one was more into glass blowing and one was nail smith. So that's why that's really important to know. There are spelling variations. Don't be too concerned when you see them. So BV can be V. You might see a C at different places. One of the ones that always gets me confused is the S instead of the little chapeau. This is a hat. That accent mark literally means that they took an S out of it somewhere. So forest is forêt with a little chapeau. That's what we call them. Let's go to numbers. So the numbers are harder in French than they are in Latin, mainly because there's a few different ways of saying numbers. In English, we have fourscore, and everyone, I'm pretty sure, knows that that is 4 20s or 80. Numbers in French have a very similar system. All of the numbers to represent these bigger numbers, but they do it for more than just like fourscore. They do it for a lot of them. So the first one's 70. Anything that's 70 is 70, which literally is 60, 10, 60 plus 10. It can be hard when you're looking at a year and you're like 1800, so 1800, and then you see the word 60 and then 10. You're almost tempted to put 60 something, but it's actually 70. 80 is very similar to the English. You have 4 20s, and we'll get to the numbers down here. Then you have 90. So they had to make it even more confusing and have 90 be another one, which is 80 and then 10. So it's kind of it can be a little hard for English speakers to really grasp all of these weird numbers that add on each other, because we have 70, 80, 90. We have a word for that. But just be aware when you're doing dates that you will come across that. Now, that being said, in some older records, there actually are one-word versions, which is so nice when you come across it. And it's pretty explanatory, self-explanatory. 70, 70, 80, 80, 90, 90. So I always love when I come across that because I don't have to do the, oh, is this, 80 something? Okay, so these are the numbers. Anyone that knows any Spanish numbers, you can see similarities. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And the French is fairly similar. You got wheat. That's what I love about this word, is it's pronounced wheat in French. 10 is 10, and then 11 is kind of 11. It's like 1, and then the ZE puts a 10 in place. 13, 14, 15, 16, 17. So 10, 7. Really similar to what we say in English. If you were to spell out 17, you spell out 7, and then teen is kind of like 10. So you can kind of look at that. And then it goes on. This is where the 70 and the 70 come into play. But for the most part, I'd say definitely stick with looking at a word list when you're trying to figure out these numbers, because they can be hard. Now, one thing that we have that's easier in French than English is ordinal numbers. Ordinal numbers are when you take a cardinal number, which is like 1, 2, 3, and you add an ending and make it become first, second, third. So those are ordinal numbers. In English, there's lots of different versions. We have first, you don't say first, or I don't even know how you would say second with first. But this can be hard for actually other speakers to realize, okay, is it third? Is it third? What is this? So the easy thing about that in French is, for the most part, you're just going to add I-E-R to it. That's how you make an ordinal number. Number 1 is premier. So that's not unier, that's premier, which, you know, first prime. That's pretty easy to remember. There's just a few spelling changes that don't really make too much of a difference. But as you can see, 2, and then you add E-M-E. So E-M-E is what's going to make it an ordinal number always. Quatrième, cinquième, sixième, septième, and going on. You might come across abbreviated ordinal numbers. In English, we have first as 1st. Well, in French, for the most part, they just add a little E at the end or a little degree sign. So that's what you're coming across when you see like a 2E, that's deuxième. Okay, so now we're going to get into the meat of things, baptism records in French. As you can see, for the most part, your baptism records are going to look very similar to the Latin baptism records. First, you'll have the date of the baptism mentioned. Baptized was this person. If it's 1E, that indicates it's a male baby. And if it's 2, that's female. The name of the child will be listed, followed with possibly. This doesn't always happen, but sometimes they will say when this child in particular was born. So if you see the word NE, that's saying, hey, this child was born on a different day, or they're putting down that birthday. Fils and fille are also where you're going to find your gender if you can't quite tell from these. Fils is son, fille, daughter. Then we get to possible words that modify the word son and daughter. You might come across légitime, legitimate, illégitime, naturel. Pretty easy to figure out what those words are in English. The first person to be mentioned when they say son or daughter of is going to be the father. They might add a few extra information things concerning the father. So you look at the name, and if there's more words before this word, which means and, then you know they're giving you information about the father that might be really helpful. Then they list the mother. The godfather and the godmother, I typically skip those details because you can't always prove the relationship. So usually I tend to stop the act right about there. But just so you know, that's what it says. There's lots of different words that I've come across in birth records, but I would say that the only thing that I'm going to mention that's really important is sous condition. So this is a conditional baptism. I spoke about it a little bit with the Latin, so I'm going to bring it up right here. Sous condition means under a certain condition. When a child was born and they were perhaps going to die, they were in a bad state, the midwife could perform what was called a baptême d'urgence, or baptism under a certain condition. If the child lived, a priest would put down their actual baptism and say, if this child is able to be baptized, if the conditions allow this child to be baptized, I'm baptizing him. So you might come across that and it might be confusing, but as long as you know that they allowed midwives to perform emergency baptisms, it can kind of help you figure out these irregular looking records. Jumeau means twin. I've come across a few where there's a twin, and that word is kind of your key point to look for two people with the same parents. One thing that I've come across is ainsi nommé pour avoir, and then they'll talk about it. This means who was thus named for having been born. Where I see this is when the baby is named after the saint of the day. So you'll come across these records where it says this person was named Bartholomew. Ainsi nommé, thus named for having been born on the day of Bartholomew. So that's just kind of something interesting that I've come across. This is an irregular record that I found, and it says Le 26, which is 26th of February. And then the date, if you notice, is 1796. They found a baby and baptized it. And the baby, they named Louise, possibly Lambert, but I cut it off. They were aged about 10 months. And this baby was found in the road where the monks had, you know, I don't know if there's a specific road called Monk Road, or if they were just saying at the road by the monastery area. So that's kind of cool how they're like, we don't know who the parents are, but we found this baby, so we baptized this baby. You might come across weird things like that, who knows? Tips, you'll see the date written in multiple different ways, which we kind of went over. So you might see it fully written out, or you might see letters. And then let's see, when you see the word né, that indicates when the child's born. And I had this listed a little further in this guide. There's those specific words we went over, like aujourd'hui, that means today, le même jour, or maybe yesterday. Sometimes they'll put a date there. So it's always good to get as much info as you can from these things. Okay, I think we need to practice a little bit on reading baptism records, and I'm just going to go over it briefly. So 26. If you have your number list, you can tell that that's 26. And then février, that's February. And you know, you'll note that that B and V, that spelling variation I was talking about, really comes into play with how English came with the word February. Was by the sous-signé, sous is under, and signé is by the below sign. You can mostly skip this information until you hit the word baptisé. You'll notice there's an extra E right here. That means the baby's going to be a baby girl. Louise Lambert, probably, or Lambertine. Aged, there's an extra E, that indicates female again, 10 months. So 10 mois. Found is trouvé. Think of a treasure trove. It's literally treasure that you found all together. Found in the road, rue. And then capucin, or capucin, I don't know where that is. I tried to see if there was actually a road somewhere, but it didn't come up as anything. And then they go straight into godmother and godfather. Let's just go straight to civil birth. So, civil birth records are a little different. This is where things are going to start getting good. We have it starting with the date, which is in red here for a reason. I stepped out on this guide that will be posted every single step, and it might look a little overwhelming, but you'll be able to figure it out if you just keep looking at records with it. So, in the year, whatever, on this day of the month, it will be the date the act was recorded. Now, I would always suggest that you actually note this down right when you're looking at a record. When you note down that date, you can use it later on when it says yesterday or today to determine the actual birth of the child. You will skip the next parts because that's just saying when the dad appeared or whoever was declaring it, they appeared at this time. And where did they appear? They appeared before us. And then they'll give so much information about who they're appearing before. They'll say, we're appearing before the mayor of the civil commune of this area, who is aged this old. And they will go into a lot of depth. So you're going to skip after the date all the way until you see est or sont comparu. Comparu means appear. That's that word that I kind of showed on the first one, on the first page. And that means you're going to get your first declarant. Always mark down the name of the first declarant, because most likely they are related to this child. And usually it's a father. So they'll have his name. Sometimes they'll have an occupation. So verrier is a glassblower. They'll have the age. I put the E for feminine in case it's a midwife that's declaring this birth, because that happened too. They'll give how old he is and where he's residing. Once you mark this down, just kind of keep it in your memory, because further down it's going to say if that person's related. So the next word after that, they'll have one or two more people coming to declare. And usually anyone that's after that first person is not related. So you can skip until you see the phrase déclarer que. This is where they're actually declaring stuff. So they declared that. And then you'll get the date, was born. So look for the word né, like birth. To figure out when that person was born, it will say something along the lines of aujourd'hui, which would be the same date that you marked on that very top. It might be yesterday, le jour d'hier, la veille, and they might have other versions. They might even have like on the 12th of this month in this year 10 years ago, because they never declared the birth. But that just kind of gives you an idea of where to look to get the child's birth. Next will be the word un enfant du sexe. That tells you the gender. So you'll always kind of see that. And then masculin, féminin. I don't think I need to explain that. That's pretty self-explanatory there. This is where it will say the father's name and the mother's name. If you see that phrase, de Louis le déclarant, of him, that's what we looked at, and then the declarant, then you know that this person up here that has a little extra info is the father. Then they will list the mother. After that, they'll have some phrasing that's along the lines of auquel on a déclaré donné les prénoms. The word you're going to look for is prénom, because that means first names. So this is where they're giving the name of the baby. And after that, there's pretty much not too much that's important. They'll have witnesses, but usually the witnesses are people that are in that office, and they're like, hey, come and witness that everyone signed this act. One thing that is kind of cool, though, is at the end of an act, it will declare that everyone signed it, but if a person didn't know how to write or how to sign their name, it would say, everyone signed, that's signé, excepté, so except for le père. I'm used to seeing these words, so they jump out at me. You might have to look at them and try to figure out the handwriting. But the father, who declared that he doesn't know how to write. So you can kind of use that information. In fact, right here, you can see beau-père. I don't know if that's a name or if that's actually father-in-law, who knows? But you can use this information to distinguish once again for maybe someone with the same name in that town that can write. And they'll put their signatures down, as you can see. Okay, I'm just going to go straight into death records, and then we will look through a few. But as far as death records go, they're pretty easy after you get civil births down. They have a very similar format. You'll have the date right off the bat. Then you skip everything because they're talking about when these people showed up at the door to declare it and who was the person that's writing it down. You don't need any of that information. So you just note the date and skip to comparu, which means appeared. Once you get there, you might want to write down who the declarants are. A lot of times you'll get more than one person that's related to the deceased. So how that will go is you'll see the declarant's name first. They'll have âgé de, which means they are this many years old. I always mark it down just because it's really helpful. They'll have an occupation, and then they will have a relationship to the deceased. If it says words, and I have, let's see, do I have them down right here? I don't have them down right here, but if they have those relationship words that we went over on that first page, such as brother of the deceased, then you can say, hey, I now have the information for this brother that I didn't know existed until I saw this. So this person had a brother and he's about that old. So I'll go back in the records and look for someone around that time period. Then they'll have where they're residing. This repeats for every single declarant. I've seen grandchildren declaring, deaths, nephews, all sorts of things. So always pay attention to who is declaring these death records. Next, we have the word déclarer que. So this is where they're actually going to start saying what they're there for. We've gotten through all that information about when it took place, who was there, and now we're going to get to the meat of the record. You will see right after déclarer que, there will be a date of the death. So you might come across this day here. So aujourd'hui, which is today, which means you have to look at number 1 and go, oh, that's this date. If you come across the word yesterday, hier, then you have to go, oh, this date minus 1 day, the day before. That's going to help you figure out the exact time of death. Speaking of exact time of death, we don't actually need to know unless if you're just really intrigued, the exact time that they died. They will usually say at 4:30 in the morning. So you can skip that, or if you're interested, you can always read that because it can be quite interesting to see the exact time of death, especially when there's like a disaster in a town and everyone kind of has the same time of death. That can be indicative of some sort of event. So next you will have the name of the actual person who died. The gender can be confirmed by whether or not âgé has an E at the end. They will be aged a certain amount of years. And this is based on whoever's declaring it. So sometimes I've noticed in the records, son-in-laws don't do the best with recording their loved ones' death records, because sometimes they just weren't quite sure who my mother-in-law's mother is. So you might come across those issues, but that's okay. You're just looking for main relationships and working your way through this. Then they'll have that person's occupation. Sometimes they'll have where they're from or where they're residing. It's really nice when they have that they were born in, let's say, Gilly, but they are residents of this place, which is Jumet. So that can kind of help you go, hey, I don't have this person's birth. I'm going to look around this time period in this area. Sometimes you'll come across this term, and veuf or veuve means widower or widow. So widow of, or you might come across this term, époux de, the spouse of. So if it's widower or widow, what that indicates is the person they're going to name here died before they did, and they were married. That's always really a good point to say, I don't know when this person's wife died, but I do know it was before whatever this date is, because they were listed as a widower. Spouse of means their wife or husband, they're still alive. So you can say, okay, this person died after that date. That's where I'm going to start looking. Almost always, as long as they knew who the parents were, you will get this word, which is fils or fille, son, daughter, of, and then they'll give the parents, which is always a bonus. When they give the parents, the father and the mother, you might see certain words in front. And one of the words you want to look out for is défunt or défunt, which is deceased. That can help you out too. In marriage records, when they have that word, or décédé, kind of a variant of it, it will actually give you the exact date that that person died, which is very valuable in those marriage records. Then you have a décédé. After all of this information, which basically was summed up with, they declared that this person died. There's no such thing as a run-on sentence in French. So this is all one big sentence, and this is where it says they died. Sometimes they'll repeat the date right here. And then after that, it'll just say the declarants have signed with us this act. And that's the end of a death record. So kind of cool information that you will find in a death record as opposed to just the birth. You will get a lot more info. If you come across the word célibataire or célibatrice, that was right before or right about, like here, they will say this person, célibataire, aged this many years old. That answers a very important question for people doing genealogy. And that question is, did this person ever marry? So that's always a good word to look for to indicate, okay, we know that we hit the end of the line right there. Marriages are hard to read in French. They are long when they get to the civil marriages. And in fact, this is one of the shorter ones I've found, but this is just one marriage act. And then I believe this one shows some longer, harder to read ones. It can be very intimidating to want to read these records when you're looking at them because it's this whole big block of text. Sometimes they had typed out words, sometimes they didn't. So I will just suggest that you always look at the original. It's very tempting to maybe trust if it's indexed, the index, but there's so much information in these marriage acts that are so important for genealogy. Probably the most important, and my friend Vicky will know this, are the babies that are listed at the end of an act. The babies are usually these illegitimate children. And what happens is at the very end of the act, the couple can say, hey, we would like to declare that this little baby is actually ours and now they're legitimized. And why this is important is because without mentioning that, you'd never be able to link that child to a father because in the registry, they will be under their mother's name if they're illegitimate. But we'll get to that in a second. First, we're going to get through. You can tell that this is already a lot bigger and overwhelming. But the first thing you'll come across in a marriage is the date. And this is the date of the marriage. So you don't have to calculate anything unless if it's in the French Republic calendar. You will skip all that information that appears where they say at this time, where, before us. And you'll go straight to sont comparus, so appeared. The first person to appear on a marriage record is the groom. And here's where you're going to get a lot of info that can be really overwhelming. I think on this, I haven't quite looked at this, but I think this might all be one sentence. Oh, it stops right there. So this whole paragraph is like one sentence. Oh, right there. It can be hard to be able to divide that sentence up. But the first person is going to be the groom. After the groom, his occupation. So nail maker or nailsmith, cloutier, all sorts of things. They'll have his exact age. And by exact age, I mean exact age. What they would do is a lot of times in order to get married with these civil registers, all of the acts that were mentioned on here, such as the birth acts of each of the groom and bride, they had to be delivered over a copy or an extract of it. So the officer that was writing this down would calculate the exact age to the year, to the month, and to the day of how old that person was based on that birth record that they received. And just know that there are errors there that I will go over. So if the person happens to not be the exact same age as what their birth says, it's okay, because they are just basing that off of whatever was delivered to them. Moving on, it will give the birthplace and sometimes the exact date of birth of the groom. This is very helpful because if you're like, I have no records of this person, I don't know where they were born, the marriage record will tell you where they're living currently, where they were born, and what date they were born. The next part you're going to come across is libre d'obligation. And you're going to skip all of this until you get to words that are like the son of or the widower of. What this is like I think I talked about this in a prior meeting, but at 1795, okay, the French took over all of Belgium, and it became a specific law that every Belgian man had to serve in the French military. And the way that they enforced this was once you got married, you had to provide proof that you had actually served. So this section will have a lot of information saying, hey, they're free of all obligations. And I'll just kind of give you the English translation of having served in the military. And this act, this was by the testimony of this person. It was delivered to our door. They're just basically proving that this person did indeed serve in the military. Once you come across a word like widower, you're going to want to pay attention because it will say not only the name of who their first spouse was, but it will give the exact date of death. And that's really cool because if it says widower of, let's say, Alphonsine Leclerc, it will say that she died in this town on this date. And then you can find proof of that record and maybe even more kids that aren't on your tree. One of the last things you'll see is for the groom part is son. This will give the parents. And the wonderful thing about this is it mentions whether or not the parents are alive at the time of this marriage. And if they were deceased, they had to deliver extracts of those death records. So you'll come across it where it says the exact date of death of the parent, where they died, and you can use this record to go back. So that's why it's so important to look through these marriage records, because if you just skim through and just get the name of the bride and groom, you're going to miss out on all of these leads. It'll say that they're present and consenting. It's like ici, présent et consentant. That means they're still alive. The next section is for the bride, and it's very similar to the groom. You'll have the name of the bride, occupation, and then the exact date of birth or age, then the extract, so the exact date of birth, where they're residing. They won't go through this military servicing because women weren't required to serve in the military. But you might see veuve, which is widow, and that might give you information about prior marriages. Then it gives daughter of, and it will give the same information that was recorded up here. So you'll be able to know who her parents are, and if they died, when they died, and where they died. The next section is where we're going to find the jewels, the really important things that might be left out. It'll go through a lot of words. They will go through lesquels nous ont requis, which means who requested to us that we should proceed with this marriage. And then they say there were no opposition, no indication that this marriage shouldn't happen. These publications, they were made at this date. So if you're interested in finding the publications of marriages, it'll give the date of each one. But they don't really contain any more information in the marriage records. So I usually skip it. But the word you're going to look for is au nom du loi. Nom means name of the law. So in the name of the law, because, it's a civil registry, they don't have the church doing it, but in the name of the law, we declare that these people were united in marriage. They'll list the groom and the bride. And this is where you got to pay attention right after this section. You're going to look for two different things. The first thing is a baby. So they will say that they declared that there was born of them. So declared, born, a child. That means they're going to put down all the information possible about this baby. And I think I have that written down. Yes. So this is what the general format will look like when you find a little illegitimate baby that was legitimized by the marriage. They will say declared, there was born of them a child. They'll give the sex, du sexe masculin or féminin. Then they have this big long phrase, inscrit sur les registres de l'état civil. This literally means recorded, so inscribed in a way, in the registers of the civil state of, and then they give the place. So when you see this, you're going to go, oh, this is where this child was born. Note that down. And then they give the date of the act. You use that date of the act and the place to go back through the records, go through the birth areas, and find that record. And you will notice that it will have the baby's name as it is written in the record. So it will say under the name of, and it'll give the name of the child. The last name will be the mother's name. And it's important to know that now that they're legitimized by marriage, they're going to go under the father's last name. So this really is the link that can link together those babies that might be lost otherwise. Then there will be some words that they say, such as who they claim or recognize to be their son or daughter, and that they intend to legitimize by this marriage. So just always look for, if you see the word ont déclaré and then né d'un enfant. That means there's a baby that you need to investigate further because they might not be on your family tree on Family Search. The next thing you'll look for isn't quite as important as that, but they will have witnesses listed. They'll say in the presence of. They will name each witness and then from there give all the information about that witness. And at some point, they will indicate what the relationship is. So usually I just skim through this and look at the names. And I'm like, oh, that last name looks familiar. Let's see if they're related. And you're going to look for those relationship words. If you come across the word ami or voisin, they're not related. Just saying that they're a friend or neighbor or someone that came up and was a witness of this marriage. But sometimes you'll see that it's a brother or an uncle, and that can be really important for marriage records. Now, since marriage records are so hard to read, I figured we could look at one before we end for the day. And I'm going to be going over extensively the marriage records in the next week. But this is just a kind of a taste of what they look like. So luckily they start off here giving all the info. We're in Gilly, and then this is a year, but this is where the act starts. So it starts with the year, an, and then 1823. You will definitely have to consult those numbers. When you get used to how numbers are written in French, it'll come pretty easy. But 1000 is 1,000, 800 is 800. There's 100 cents in a dollar, so that's 100. 20 and 3. So you'll have to probably look that up to get used to that, but I'm just going to keep going. Okay, and then this says on the 2nd of January. If you remember right from the little guide that will be posted, it says right here what time the people came over to get married. So you're going to skip all of this until you see the word sont comparus, that comparu, which has appeared. So you just kind of skip through and then right there, sont comparus. So this is the point where you're going to pay attention because this is the groom. Lambert Leclerc. So there's the name of the groom. Born, see the NE, that gives where he was born, Montigny-sur-Sambre. And then it gives his date of birth, which unfortunately, as you can see here, is in the French Republican calendar. So you will have to use that website, which we will do next week. But It says the 16th of Messidor, which is a totally new name of a month, year 6 of the French Republic. So just know that's where the date of birth is going to be. Domicilié, domicile. That means they're residing wherever that is. I don't know what that is. Then it gives his age. He's 25 years. So âgé, notice there's no E because it's a boy, de 25 ans. Fils majeur. So this means he's of an old enough age, but he is the son of François Leclerc. Well, this word right here is going to give you more information that you need to mark down. Décédé. This dad is dead. And he died in the said place, which would probably be that one that I don't know what it is. But he died on the 5th of Vendémiaire, year 13. So another one that died during the French Republic. And then you skip to the next name, Marie-Catherine Richier. That's the name of the mother. His spouse. And then this is that occupation, housekeeper. Then domicilié à Montigny. Notice it didn't say that she was deceased. That's because she is right here, présente et consentante. So you can use that to say, if I'm going to find a death record for Marie-Catherine Richier, I'm going to look after the date of this marriage. Then it gives the bride with similar information. Marie-Joseph Dailly gives her birth in Gilly, 10 April. We can read that, right? 17 and then 99. That's one of those words one of those numbers that's all combined together that you have to go 80, 4 20s, okay, 80, and 10, 9. So that would actually be 99. It's a really long way of writing that. It gives this little letter, which means that she was residing in Gilly currently. Gives her age with an E at the end, so that's feminine. 23 years old, and she's just, I guess, a worker, ouvrière. She's the daughter of Louis-Joseph Dailly. It gives his information, and Françoise Razin. So they're both alive. Then you're going to skip all of this information until you see the word sont unis and a au nom de la loi, I believe. A really good indication of that is when you see bigger names. So when you see that, that's the name of the groom and the bride. You can go, oh, hey, in the name of the law, that. Easy. Okay, so I get to skip all of this stuff. Then we have Lambert Leclerc and Marie-Joseph Dailly were united in marriage. And then in the presence of. These are your witnesses. And just looking through it, we have Philippe Delporte. Let's see if he has any relationship. I'm just looking through it really quick because you'll have to look at these and try and figure it out. I don't see any relationships, but I do see that the mother of the maybe bride didn't know how to write. So here's your signatures that are so beautiful. I know that's a lot to go through, but next week with the French Revolutionary calendar, we'll practice on the marriage records. In the meantime, I think I want to show just really quickly how you can access these guides online, because it can be kind of hard sometimes to find them. So BYU, you're going to go to the BYU Family History Library. And how you're going to access all of these guides and information is you're going to go to classes and webinars. And then I believe it'll be under family history classes, right?
Probably right now it links under Sunday classes.
Oh, it might be under Sunday class. Okay.
Where you go to the virtual.
Okay. At one point, it will be in this virtual class archive. Right now, they're kind of common right now. But once you select virtual classes archive, you will see kind of all of these big, huge amounts. And luckily, let's see where mine is.
It's probably easiest if they go up
foreign countries. Belgium. Yeah, So I found it in a different way, but you're going to have to go to the family history library and look at the archives, right?
Uh-huh.
You're going to find the class and click on it. And it'll have right here, this is from last week, in case if you weren't here, Latin handout. So you can look at that and download it for your own records. And then I have some fill out sheets. That'll take a little bit, but anyways, I think that's enough for this class. Thank you.
Thank you, Liz. That was awesome.